Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our channel Med Made Easy. We will start off our journey of videos with the simplest of medicine, or the basics of medicine, which is anatomy, and we will start off at the skull, which is kind of, self-explanatory why we're starting there from top to bottom. Easiest, getting into the more complex, more intimate details of anatomy. So, first of all, we're going to start off with the gross structure of the skull, the whole skull will be broken down, the whole head will be broken down into three, maybe four parts, depending on what we see, on how we can collect all the information together and present them in the simplest and easiest ways to try to make medicine just a little bit easier for you guys. So, let's start it off without further ado. The skull. The skull is also known as the neurocranium. Neurocranium, it is basically the composition of bone and meninges. When you break it down, the skull has two parts: the calvaria, which is just the roof or the skull cap, or the cranial base, or the basic cranium, which is the base. So basically, if you draw a line through the middle right here, you will have the calvaria, skull cap, and the basic cranium. Plus, we also have the facial bones, which form the face, and all the facial bones are pretty much points of attachment for facial muscles, for facial expression, mastication, all that. So, the neurocranium is formed from 8 bones, 4 singular and 2 pairs, or well, 4, so 8 total bones. The 4 singular bones are the ethmoids, phoenoid, frontal, and occipital, and the 2 pairs are the 2 pairs of the temporal. You have one on this side right here, and then one on the other side, and 2 parietal here and on the other side, if you were to imagine this in a 3D structure. So, all the bones of the skull, the neurocranium, are joined by sutures. See these little lines, these little scribbled lines? This is not somebody who has fallen and injured himself. No, these are known as sutures. They connect the bones together, and they are immovable. They are immovable joints, very sturdy, very tough. However, as we grow up, these are not always fully attached, and sometimes they are cartilage, connected by hyaline cartilage, also known as syndacrosis, as well as in some areas, such as between the frontal and the parietal bones, we have fontanelles, which are small gaps inside the skull, allowing the brain to grow so that the skull can match up to its size later on. Because obviously, we do not come out with the same skull we have now. Moving on to the facial aspect of our skull. Facial aspect is the one that you see when you look at somebody, at their face. I know, makes sense, right? So, we have the frontal bone. It is composed of the frontal bone, zygomatic bone, the orbit, which contains your eyes, the nasal bones, your nose, the maxilla, your upper rows of teeth, plus part of your nose, and the mandible, which is your lower jaw. So, as you can see here, all of them are listed out, so you can look at them specifically. The frontal bone is the one that makes up your forehead. Orbits, eyes, nose, like I said, is the nasal, and the maxillary bone is right here. It makes, let's say, between your cheek and your upper row of teeth. That's the maxillary bone. You can draw like a line between your cheekbones down. That would be the maxillary. Zygomatic is going back to the cheekbones. The actual cheekbones are the zygomatic bones, and the mandible is your lower jaw. Now, going into the frontal bone, let's start from top to bottom. Frontal bone, we have the most, let's say, prominent feature of the frontal bone is the superciliary arches. Superciliary arches are also known as your eyebrows. They are the things that let you emote mostly. You know, shocked, surprised, angry, all go through your eyebrows. If you want to imagine, just imagine the red angry bird guy. The superciliary arches, between them, if you were to, let's say, they're not really shown in this image, but if you were to imagine them, they would be above your eye, logically. So right here in this area, between both of your eyes, a bit above them, you will have something known as the glabella. Now, something to know about the glabella: it is a very smooth area. However, in some adults, there is the suture. Everybody has a suture, but mostly it heals up and it's pretty much invisible in most adults. But in few adults, there is something known as the metopic suture. Metopic suture is basically the frontal bone is composed of two separate bones that fuse very early on, and for some reason, in adults, unknown reason, the metopic suture remains some sort of prominent, and it is some sort of rough. You can feel it at the glabella region. So yeah, that's basically it. It's just a suture that is not supposed to be there. Sometimes it's there. Skull is very weird. Nobody knows the reasons for these things happening. Some people also have extra sutures, less sutures, not the basic, like other sutures. Very weird. Moving on. Down we go to the orbit. The orbit is composed of a lot of bones. Also on the inside we have the lacrimal, we have the ethmoid, we have the sphenoid. All those we will break down when we get into the basic cranium. Right now I'm just talking about it from the outside, just as big as it is. So we will skip the orbits. Also, just so everybody knows, there are the foramens and there are holes throughout the skull. I will not be explaining them because there are in the frontal bone a few holes. We will explain them when I go through the basic cranium because that is filled with holes, so might as well, connect them together. So after the orbit, we will go down to the nasal bones, and we have the piriform aperture. Piriform basically means pear-shaped. So if you were to use your imagination just a little bit, you will be able to see that the place where you get your oxygen in, the nose, looks like a pear. If you take out all the flesh and cartilage and all, just leave the bones, it kind of looks like pear-shaped. And between the two pear shapes we have the nasal septum, which, as you know, a septum is anything that divides things into two parts. You got the septum in your heart, also you got the septum in your nose. And inside the piriform aperture we have the conchae. Conchae, there are three conchaes, and we will explain each one in detail later on, again when we go inside the brain. But they are usually just, they turbulate the air throughout as you breathe so that it gets warmer, so you don't get cold air inside. Now, moving on to the last bone, second to last bone, we have the maxilla, or the maxillary bone. Again, most of the bones of your head, even though they seem as one, they were actually two. We described the frontal bone before, and now the maxillary bone. Maxillary bone again was split in half. It was two bones. Again, it fused very early on, and you can only see the suture that connects the two parts of the maxillary bone from inside or under the jaw. So if you were to open somebody's mouth, stick your head in somehow and scrape off all the skin, you would be able to see something known as the intermaxillary suture. It is in the median plane. Again, for those of you who do not know the planes, median plane is the plane that splits you exactly in half. Like, see this line right here? That's, like, the mouse is not showing. Right here. This line, this is a median plane. Exactly in half. Splits you to perfect halves. For those of you who want to also think, just think of any toy you had as a kid. It always had that one line in half. Yeah, that's what it is. Anyway, moving on. Mandible is just the jaw. The jaw has I think, sorry, we're done with the maxilla. Moving on. Got a bit confused. Mandible, here we have two parts. Again, two bones fused into one really early on. Hard to differentiate. It fused at the mandibular symphysis, which is right again in the middle, median plane, because they're two equal bones. They connect together, and it forms near the mandibular symphysis. There is something known as the mental protuberance, which is your chin. That is the mental protuberance. So the chin bone that you feel if you go touching down there, that is the mental protuberance. It is a protuberance through its name. Yeah, I know. Very hard to get. Anyway, moving on. This is again another photo of the frontal aspect. Like we said, ethmoid is inside. Ethmoid is the ethmoidal air cells. It's behind the piriform apertures. It's inside. We will get to the inside. Trust me, it's a whole maze inside. We'll get to it when we do. This is the intermaxillary suture that I explained, which connects both of them. And now let's move on to the lateral aspect of the skull. Now, the lateral aspect is formed by one bone specifically that is the most characteristic. It is the temporal bone, or the temporal bone has its own fossa, temporal fossa. Temporal fossa is a fossa used for the attachment of the muscles for mastication. Again, we'll get to them in its own time. However, the temporal fossa is bounded, or has some specific boundaries. It is bound by the superior temporal lines, linea temporalis superior, that's the Latin name, linea temporalis inferior, which is the inferior temporal line. It is also anteriorly bound by the frontal and zygomatic bones. If you were to see here, the frontal bone right here and the zygomatic bone right here. This black line is the temporal fossa, by the way, just to be clear. This is the temporal fossa, and inferiorly it is bound by the zygomatic arc. Zygomatic arc is the bone that is formed by the connection of the temporal bone and the zygomatic bone. It is split into two parts. That one arc, this arcus zygomaticus, as you can see in this image right here, this is formed by two specific unique parts, which is the temporal temporal part of the zygomatic bone. So you're starting off with the zygomatic bone, and you have the temporal process right here, and the zygomatic process of the temporal bone. So they kind of mix and match, and they connect together, forming one solid bone. Now, another thing that is really interesting inside the temporal bone, or near the temporal bone, it's not really that clear here. We have the H-shaped suture. Can you see this right here? This H-shape. This H-shaped suture is known as the pterion. P-T-E-R-I-O-N. The pterion is present in the anterior part of the temporal fossa, clearly, and it is a collection of many bones, or it is the point where a lot of bones meet in the skull. The bones include the frontal, the parietal, the sphenoid, and the temporal bones. So all those bones, when they connect together at the certain point, it is at the pterion. Just a fun fact for you to know. It's not really, it is medically relevant, obviously, for surgeries and all, but fun thing to know. Moving on, the one thing that everybody knows a temporal bone for, it is the external acoustic opening, which leads to the external acoustic meatus, which is the ear canal, leading eventually to the eardrum. Now, we have below that, we have the inferior and posterior too. We have the mastoid process. What is the mastoid process? If you go and want to really just if you want to test it out for yourself, try it out for yourself, just take two fingers and place them behind your ear. You will feel a ball-like structure. That is the mastoid process. It is very sturdy, very tough, and it is really hard to miss. So if you cannot find it, I think you should try to change out of medicine. Moving on, we have the styloid process. This one's a bit harder to find, considering that it is deep in your neck, and if you do find it, you really should not be alive. The styloid process is again a process that is important for attachment of different muscles, tongue and all, for chewing, talking, all activities you might do with your tongue. Get to it again later. Just want you guys to know it. So yeah, that's pretty much it for the lateral aspect, because the lateral aspect is the composition of just the temporal bone. That is the most important one of them all. Now moving on, we have the occipital aspect. The occipital aspect is basically the back of the head. Now the back of the head, I don't know why, but I really love it. Love the way it looks. Maybe because I've always gone just the back of people's heads. But yeah, I should shut up. Okay, the occipital aspect of the cranium is also known as the occiput. It is just the occipital bone again. It has the suture, which is the lambdoid suture. Lambdoid suture is the suture between the occipital bone and the parietal bone, and the sagittal suture is between the two bones. We'll get to the sutures in a bit, don't worry. We have the occipital bone in the back, and we have the external occipital protuberance, which again is very palpable if you touch it. If you just put your hand behind on the back of your head and just wiggle it around, you'll find another ball. Yeah, I know you got a lot of balls in your body. You don't really know a lot about them. This right here is a again, attachment. Anything that is standing out in your body is usually an attachment for something else. It's all connected somehow. And from the external occipital protuberance, if you go left and right, immediately from there, you have the superior nuchal line. Right here, you can see it. It's tagged in this photo. The superior nuchal line is like just basically two lines that go from the occipital external occipital protuberance, and we also have if there's superior, there's always going to be inferior. We have the inferior nuchal line, which is harder to find and not really that important. And we have also the lambdoid suture. Sometimes in some people it is present as a depression, so if you go directly up from your external occipital protuberance, you might be able to feel a little bit of a depression. That mostly would be your lambda suture. Below that we have the foramen magnum, where your head fits onto your spine. You know, the connection where it's made is just the foramen magnum. Again, it's a foramen, so it's a hole, so we'll go through the holes in the next lecture, or the next video. Why am I saying lecture? I'm sorry, I don't want to make this boring. And last but not least, we have the superior out. Again, we got, okay, just another image showing the external occipital protuberance and the superior nuchal lines, just for those who want to see. Now, the final part, or the final aspect, is the superior aspect of the head, seeing the top of the head. Here you can see the frontal bone, and the coronal suture. Coronal suture is the suture that connects the frontal bone and the parietal bones. Parietal bone and parietal bone is sagittal suture, and parietal bones and occipital bone is the lambdoid suture, and parietal bone and the temporal bone, yeah, parietal bone and the temporal bone is the squamous suture. So just those are all the sutures that are important. Very big, very important, very big. Sorry, very important. Yeah, they also are the biggest actually. So the superior aspect is oval shaped. We have the coronal suture, which I described, sagittal suture, and one thing, like we have the pterion in the temporal region, we have the bregma. It sounds very Russian. The bregma is the point where the sagittal and the coronal suture meet. So right here, see this like T shape, this right here, this is known as the bregma. It is where the coronal and sagittal suture meet. So we have pterion and we have bregma. I don't know why I feel every time I say bregma, I have to give some sort of accent like bregma. Yeah, alright. And that's pretty much the whole skull basic, you know. Oh, there it is, see, bregma. That is pretty much everything you need to know about the skull from the outside. So we have bregma and lambda, just to make it clear, bregma, lambda, and the lambdoid suture, making it clear so nobody gets confused. So that's pretty much it. I hope you guys enjoyed. See you guys for the next video, and if any of you need any specific videos or any help on anything that we have not explained, you can just ask and we will gladly explain it. Thank you guys for watching. It's been a pleasure. See you guys in the next video.